What if everything you thought you knew about World War I was wrong? Beyond the trenches and the glory lies a darkness so profound, it changed humanity forever. Prepare to confront the unseen horrors, the psychological scars, and the brutal realities that truly defined the Great War. Forget the battlefields. The true terror of World War I lurked in the shadows. This isn't the history you learned in school. We're about to uncover the chilling, often unacknowledged, atrocities, and the unimaginable psychological toll that soldiers endured, painting a picture of brutality far beyond the front lines. For millions of soldiers, death didn't always come from a bullet. It came from the filth they lived in. Imagine spending months trapped in a narrow ditch, surrounded by rotting corpses, swarmed by rats that grew fat on human flesh. These rats weren't the small pests you know today. Some were said to grow as large as cats, feeding on human remains. Soldiers told stories of rats gnawing on men's boots, or worse, their wounds as they slept. Lice became another invisible army. Every soldier carried them. They burrowed into uniforms, into blankets, into every seam of fabric. Soldiers scratched until their skin bled, but there was no escape. From lice came trench fever, an illness that caused weeks of high fever, excruciating leg pain, and rashes. It wasn't fatal most of the time, but it was crippling. Men would be pulled from the front lines, their bodies wrecked not by bullets, but by insects. Ether, too, became a weapon. Trenches flooded with rain and waste, mixing with the bodies of the dead. Soldiers drank from puddles laced with disease. Dysentery spread like wildfire, leaving men doubled over, dehydrated, and too weak to even hold a rifle. The war had created not just a battlefield, but a breeding ground for every possible illness. And then, when the world thought things couldn't grow worse, nature struck its most devastating blow: the Spanish flu of 1918. It came quietly, and it killed mercilessly. Soldiers reported men collapsing mid-march, their lungs filling with fluid until they drowned in their own bodies. Doctors and nurses were powerless. The flu spread from the trenches to towns and cities, killing an estimated 50 million people worldwide, more than the war itself. For many families, the son who survived the front line brought death.
And if disease didn't take you, medicine might. With antibiotics decades away, infections meant one thing: amputation. Men entered surgery halls with a wound in the leg and left without the limb. Gas gangrene, an infection that rotted flesh at terrifying speed, left doctors with no choice but to cut. These amputations were often performed with little anesthesia in dirty tents where screams echoed like battlefield cries. Soldiers began to fear the doctor's tent as much as they feared enemy fire. If disease destroyed the body, the mind was shattered by something far darker. World War I introduced the world to a terrifying condition: shell shock. It was a wound you couldn't see, yet it crippled men as surely as a bullet. Soldiers trembled uncontrollably, lost their voices, or collapsed into paralysis. Some wandered aimlessly, muttering nonsense. Others screamed endlessly in their sleep, their minds replaying bombardments that never stopped. At first, commanders dismissed shell shock as cowardice. They believed these men were simply too weak, unfit for war. But the truth was different. No human mind was built to endure the constant thunder of artillery, the sight of friends obliterated in an instant, or the endless waiting for death. Some estimates suggest that by 1918, nearly 10% of the British Army had experienced symptoms of shell shock. For those who survived the trenches, the war followed them home. Diaries describe men unable to sleep, terrified of sudden noises, or breaking down in tears without warning. Families who once celebrated their return often found strangers, haunted shells of men who could no longer connect with the world around them. And the treatments were almost as cruel as the condition itself. Doctors tried electroshock therapy, forcing electricity through broken minds. Others experimented with hypnosis, isolation, and even shaming men back into the fight. Instead of compassion, many soldiers were treated like failures. Some were even executed for desertion, when in reality they were victims of trauma beyond comprehension. Shell shock gave birth to what we now call PTSD, but in 1914 there was no language for it. There was only suffering, ignored and forgotten.
The Great War did not only claim human lives, it destroyed the very earth itself. Battlefields like Verdun, the Somme, and Passchendaele were reduced to wastelands of mud and metal. Trees vanished, fields turned to endless craters, and villages were erased so completely that their names were the only thing that survived. The war left behind a deadly inheritance. Millions of shells were fired across Europe, and not all of them exploded. Even today, over a century later, farmers in France and Belgium pull up thousands of rusted shells every year, a grim harvest known as the Iron Harvest. Some are filled with explosives, others contain mustard gas, still lethal if disturbed. Entire regions remain poisoned. In the so-called Zone Rouge of France, the soil is so contaminated by lead, arsenic, and chemical residue that it is unsafe for humans. Forests that grew back are twisted and stunted. Some fields will never again be used for farming. The war's scars are still carved into the land. And then there were the animals. More than 8 million horses and mules were conscripted into service. They pulled artillery, carried supplies, and charged into battle alongside men. Many drowned in mud at Passchendaele, their bodies swallowed whole by the earth. Dogs delivered messages through gunfire. Pigeons carried intelligence across enemy lines. They served loyally, but most never returned. Their sacrifice, unlike men's, rarely appeared in memorials. The Great War was not just a human tragedy. It was an environmental apocalypse, a wound carved into both man and nature. The unseen horrors of World War I did not vanish when the guns fell silent in 1918. They lived on in survivors, men missing arms and legs, men who could no longer sleep without nightmares, men who found themselves strangers in their own homes. Widows mourned, orphans grew up never knowing their fathers, and nations carried scars that shaped the century to come. Medical advances tried to catch up with the war's cruelty. Surgeons experimented with reconstructive surgery, creating some of the first facial prosthetics for soldiers disfigured beyond recognition. But these faces, part mask, part scar, were haunting reminders of a war that reshaped even the human body.
Was called the war to end all wars, but the lessons of its horrors were not enough. Less than 2 decades later, the world plunged into an even greater conflict. The unseen horrors of the First World War became shadows that loomed over the Second. Yet the legacy of the Great War remains. It taught us about trauma. It forced medicine to advance. It reshaped landscapes and societies forever. But perhaps its greatest lesson is one we still struggle to accept, that war is not just about strategy and victory. It is about invisible costs, scars that stretch far beyond the battlefield, scars that last for generations. So the next time you hear about World War I, remember, it wasn't just fought in trenches. It was fought in the body, in the mind, and in the very earth itself.
The forgotten voices. They marched as boys, but died as men. In fields of mud, they fell again. No song of triumph, no gentle hand. Just silence spread across the land. The guns grew quiet, the earth still bled. The living envied, the peaceful dead. For scars remained where eyes can't see, a war that stole humanity. Their names may fade, their faces dim, but history still remembers them. Not heroes shining, but souls in pain, who paid the price, yet died in vain. So when you see the poppies grow, know they were planted long ago, by tears, by blood, by lives undone.